From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I want to assure you our country is in safe hands. I will not let the country bow. I take an oath upon this soil that I won't let this country be erased.
While U.S. media is split-screen TV today on North Korea and Michael Cohen, tension is rapidly escalating between the nuclear-armed rivals India and Pakistan. Pakistan claims it shot down 2 Indian military jets and captured a pair of Indian jet pilots. This comes a day after India carried out airstrikes inside Pakistan for the first time since 1971. We'll speak to the Pakistani-American physicist, nuclear expert Zia Min of Princeton. Then we go to Iran to speak with Code Pink's Medea Benjamin, who met with Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif in Tehran shortly before he submitted his resignation, which was subsequently rejected by the Iranian president. Then to R. Kelly. After years of allegations, the famed singer has been arrested for sexually abusing 4 women and girls.
Each of these witnesses describe a decades-long system of abuse by Mr. Kelly of underage girls and conduct that is illegal, criminal, and is indicative of someone that should never walk free another day in his life.
We'll speak to Dream Hampton, executive director of the explosive Surviving R. Kelly documentary series, which helped renew calls for R. Kelly to be investigated. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Racist, conman, cheat. These are the words Trump's former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen is expected to use today to describe the president during his public testimony before Congress. According to his prepared remarks released late Tuesday night, Cohen will say Trump knew in advance about WikiLeaks' plans to release leaked emails from the Democratic National Committee. Cohen says he personally witnessed a phone conversation between Trump and his longtime advisor Roger Stone. He's also expected to provide a check proving Trump paid him back for hush money payments made to Stormy Daniels over their alleged affair. Cohen's written testimony also covers financial information related to Trump's businesses and taxes and recounts multiple instances of racist comments by Trump. Cohen's remarks also reveal Donald Trump Jr. likely was involved in arranging the 2016 Trump Tower meeting to possibly obtain dirt on 2016 presidential rival Hillary Clinton, and that he informed his father that the meeting was all set. Democrats have accused Florida Congressmember and Trump ally Matt Gaetz of witness intimidation after he appeared to threaten Cohen on Monday, saying in the now-deleted tweet, quote, "Hey, Michael Cohen, do your wife and father-in-law know about your girlfriends? Maybe tonight would be a good time for that chat. I wonder if she'll remain faithful when you're in prison. She's about to learn a lot," he said. Michael Cohen's remarks also reveal Trump faked a medical condition to get out of the Vietnam War draft, and that Trump told him, quote, "You think I'm stupid. I wasn't going to Vietnam." Cohen's leaked testimony dropped as Trump arrived in Vietnam late Tuesday ahead of his second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Trump and Kim met briefly in front of reporters before heading to an official dinner.
I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first. And we made a lot of progress, and I think the biggest progress was our relationship is really a good one. I think that your country has tremendous economic potential, unbelievable, unlimited. And I think that you will have a tremendous future with your country, a great leader. And I look forward to watching it happen and helping it to happen.
CNN is reporting the White House initially tried to ban reporters from attending the subsequent official dinner after a journalist shouted a question to Trump about Cohen's testimony. After reporters collectively protested the move, the White House conceded one print reporter could be present alongside cameras documenting the event. The two-day summit to further negotiations on a denuclearization agreement kicks off tomorrow. Tension is continuing to escalate between the nuclear-armed rivals India and Pakistan after India carried out airstrikes inside Pakistan Tuesday for the first time since 1971. India said it was targeting a camp of the militant separatist group Jaish-e-Mohammed, which claimed responsibility for a recent attack in the Indian-administered region of Kashmir that killed more than 40 Indian soldiers, although Pakistan has denied the claim. India said Tuesday's air raid killed a very large number of militants, but Pakistan has said there were no casualties from the attack. Pakistan is now claiming it has shot down 2 Indian military jets and captured a pair of Indian jet pilots. Meanwhile, India claims it has foiled an attempt by Pakistan to bomb military installations inside India. The United States, Russia, China, and European Union have urged both of the nuclear rivals to show restraint. India and Pakistan are believed to have around 100 nuclear warheads and have fought 3 wars since 1947. We'll have more on this standoff after headlines. On Tuesday, the House voted 245 to 182 to block President Trump's national emergency declaration, which would divert billions of dollars of federal funds to build a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. This is Texas Congressmember Joaquin Castro speaking on the House floor Tuesday.
The precedent that may be set today, this week or next week when the Senate votes, if Congress allows this president's emergency declaration to stand, will not have ramifications only on this matter or the building of a border wall, but if the president is successful, he will likely come back for more.
The measure now goes to the Senate. So far, 3 Republicans, Senators Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Tom Tillis, have said they will join with their Democratic colleagues to vote in favor of the bill. At least 1 more Republican senator would also need to support the bill for it to pass. Trump, however, has vowed to veto the bill, and Congress is far from the 2/3 majority needed to override a presidential veto. At a heated congressional hearing Tuesday, lawmakers grilled administration officials about their role in implementing Trump's draconian family separation policy. Scott Lloyd, who led the Health and Human Services Refugee Office last year and oversaw the zero-tolerance policy, admitted he did not heed or report warnings of the devastating effects of separating children from their parents. This is Washington Congressmember Pramila Jayapal questioning Lloyd.
Mr. Lloyd, you are the head of this agency at the time of family separation, and you did not even allow your staff to continue to do a spreadsheet that tracked where people were. You did not put into place any policies that would pull this I don't even have words for it, horrendous policy back. Did you ever say to the administration, this is a bad idea? Here's what my child welfare experts have told us. We need to stop this policy. Did you once say that to anybody above you?
I did not say those words.
Tuesday's hearing came as the House Oversight Committee voted to subpoena the Departments of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services, as well as the Attorney General's office, for records on the children affected by Trump's family separation policy. Axios is reporting U.S. government agencies have received thousands of allegations of sexual abuse against unaccompanied minors in U.S. custody, including nearly 200 allegations involving abuse by adult staff. The nearly 6,000 allegations cover a time span from 2014 to 2018 and include reports of staff forcibly touching and engaging in relationships with minors in their care, among others. In more immigration news, a Honduran woman gave birth to a stillborn baby boy while in Immigration and Customs Enforcement custody last week. The news has renewed concerns over the treatment of pregnant women by immigration officials. Immigrant rights advocates have condemned the current ICE policy of jailing pregnant women despite previous directives that said it places undue mental and physical stress on the women. Alabama Congressmember Terry Sewell introduced the Voting Rights Advancement Act Tuesday in a bid to restore and expand on the landmark 1965 Voting Rights Act. Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy introduced the Senate version of the bill. The legislation aims to revive a key tenet of the Voting Rights Act that was gutted by a Supreme Court ruling in 2013, which removed the requirement that state and local election officials get federal approval before making changes to the voting process. The House has overwhelmingly voted to pass the Natural Resources Management Act. The sweeping public lands bill adds over 1 million acres of protected wilderness, creates 4 new national monuments, and expands 8 existing national parks. A provision in the bill prevents mining in over 370,000 acres of land around 2 national parks, including Montana's Yellowstone. The legislation would also permanently reauthorize the Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund, which lapsed last year. The bill, which was approved by the Senate earlier this month, now heads to the desk of President Trump. In more environmental news, Lake Erie has earned some of the same legal rights as humans thanks to voters in Toledo, Ohio. On Tuesday, Toledo residents enacted the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, which guarantees, quote, the right to a healthy environment and will allow citizens to sue on behalf of the lake when it's being harmed. Agricultural and industrial interests lobbied against the bill, but it still passed handily with over 60% of votes. The law is the first of its kind in the United States and comes after years of organizing by local environmental activists. Chicago residents voted for their new mayor Tuesday, where a record 14 candidates were listed on the ballot. No single candidate received enough votes to win outright, which means federal prosecutor Lori Lightfoot and Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle will head to a runoff in April. It also means Chicago is guaranteed to have its first black woman mayor. If Lightfoot wins, she will also become the city's first openly gay mayor. The new mayor will succeed Rahm Emanuel, who announced last year he would not seek a third term. Emanuel came under intense fire for, among other things, his handling of the police killing of African-American teenager Laquan McDonald. Both candidates have vowed to reform Chicago's criminal justice system. In New York City, Jumaane Williams won a special election Tuesday to become the city's new public advocate, defeating 16 other candidates. Williams has served on the city council since 2009, is known for work on housing rights and reforming police practices. Over 1,700 workers at a Wabtec locomotive plant in Erie, Pennsylvania, launched a strike Tuesday, the first strike at the factory in half a century. This is Scott Slauson, president of local United Electrical 506.
We asked for a 30-day interim agreement to basically give us a chance to negotiate a fair contract. They weren't interested in that. We're taking the course of action that we feel is necessary to protect family-sustaining jobs in our community, and we're standing up for workers' rights around the world.
The strike came one day after an $11 billion merger between Wabtec and GE, which used to run the plant. Workers say Wabtec officials refused to extend their contract as it stood under GE management and proposed cutting pay for new hires, mandatory overtime, and arbitrary schedules. Independent Senator and 2020 hopeful Bernie Sanders expressed support for the workers, writing in a letter to Wabtec CEO Raymond Bettler, quote, through the first 3 quarters of last year, Wabtec made a $256 million profit and had enough money to give you $3.5 million compensation package. The Wabtec-GE merger should not be used to take away the hard-fought gains UE has achieved over the past several decades. In more labor news, teachers in Oakland, California, enter the 5th day of their strike today. The Oakland Education Association says 96% of teachers are taking part in the strike as negotiations with the school district continue. Teachers are demanding fair wages, smaller class sizes, and more resources for their students. The United Methodist Church voted Tuesday to reinforce its ban on same-sex marriage and gay clergy members. The 53 to 47% vote reflects the stark divide in the church over LGBT rights and could trigger a split over the issue. A number of clergy members have said they're considering starting a new LGBT-friendly alliance of churches. United Methodist has 12 million members worldwide. And a prominent disability rights activist and attorney died this past Sunday after being refused an essential medication by her insurance company. Carrie Ann Lucas, who had a rare form of muscular dystrophy, helped pass legislation in Colorado to protect parents with disabilities from child welfare discrimination. In 2017, Lucas was arrested with several others after protesting Medicaid budget cuts with a 58-hour sit-in at Colorado Senator Cory Gardner's office. According According to a message on Lucas's Facebook page, United Healthcare denied her coverage for an antibiotic last year, triggering a host of medical complications which led to her death. Carrie Ann Lucas was 47 years old and is survived by her 4 adopted children, who also are all living with disabilities. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. Tension is continuing to escalate between nuclear-armed rivals India and Pakistan. Pakistan is claiming it has shot down 2 Indian military jets and captured a pair of Indian jet pilots. Meanwhile, India says it has foiled an attempt by Pakistan to bomb military installations inside of India. This comes a day after India carried out airstrikes inside Pakistan for the first time since 1971. India alleges it was targeting a camp of the militant separatist group Jaish-e-Mohammed, which claimed responsibility for a recent attack in the Indian-administered region of Kashmir that killed more than 40 Indian soldiers. India accused Pakistan of being directly involved in plotting the February 14th bombing. Pakistan, however, denies the claim.
Meanwhile, there are reports that Pakistani and Indian ground forces have exchanged gunfire in more than a dozen locations. India has also reportedly conducted 4 ground raids on Kashmiri separatist leaders. Earlier today, Pakistan announced it was shutting down its airspace and grounding all civilian planes. Pakistani army spokesman Asif Ghafoor announced the news.
Airspace इस वक्त जो बंद है वो तो due to the environment है.
The airspace is shut due to the current situation. I would say that Pakistan's response is not a retaliation, but it is a demonstration of our capability, capacity, and will, staying within the domain of responsibility as a state which has the potential. We do not want to escalate the situation.
On Tuesday, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed a crowd of soldiers following India's airstrikes inside of Pakistan.
I want to assure you our country is in safe hands. I will not let the country bow. I take an oath upon the soil that I won't let this country be erased.
The United States, Russia, China, and the European Union have urged the nuclear rivals to show restraint. India and Pakistan are believed to have around 100 nuclear warheads and have fought 3 wars since 1947. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has warned, quote, that computer models have predicted that the physical impacts of a nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan, or even a single strike on a large city, would be devastating.
We're joined right now by Zia Min, a Pakistani-born physicist, nuclear expert, and disarmament activist. He's co-director of the Program on Science and Global Security at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. Professor Min is co-author of Unmaking the Bomb, a fissile material approach to nuclear disarmament and nonproliferation. Professor Zia Min, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you respond to this latest escalation? While there's this split screen between Michael Cohen and North Korea, the summit in Vietnam, you have this very serious escalation between 2 nuclear powers, India and Pakistan.
The escalation in fighting between India and Pakistan is a grave source of concern for people all over the world, but it's part of a larger and ongoing crisis that surges into the news every so often. And so for many people, including those in the United States, this is something that they've seen before, and so they don't expect it necessarily to escalate into an all-out war with the kind of catastrophic implications that we expect war between nuclear-armed states to have.
Professor Min, could you talk about the February 14th attack that occurred inside of Indian-administered Kashmir and the supposed reason by the group known as JEM that claimed responsibility?
The Jaish-e-Mohammed, which translates as the Army of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, goes back to 2000. It's a radical Sunni militant group that has been fighting with support from the Pakistani army and its intelligence service, ISI, against India in Kashmir ever since then, and has launched many, many attacks into Indian Kashmir and even into India proper. So this is just the most recent of a long line of attacks by Jaish-e-Mohammed. But the larger issue, I think, is not this one particular attack and how Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist government in Delhi has tried to respond to it to show that it's strong because they're having an election in India, and so the Prime Minister and his party wants to prove how strong and tough they are. The real issue that we need to talk about is the fact that this level of violence between India and Pakistan has continued for a very, very long time, and that it's not so much the military on military violence, but the fact that large numbers of civilians along the line of control that divide Indian Kashmir and Pakistani Kashmir are caught in this endless barrage of artillery and firing across there, which claims civilian casualties on a regular basis, and also the fact that no one seems interested in thinking about what the future of this conflict and these people trapped in Kashmir between these two states determined to resolve their issues by force. I mean, what's the future going to be like for these people?
Well, but what's been the position of the international community, let's say the United Nations, on the future of Kashmir? Is the position of the international community that there should eventually be a referendum of possible independence for all of Kashmir, or annexation of these two administered parts by India and Pakistan into the countries that are administering them?
The United Nations basically stopped talking about Kashmir and trying to find actively any kind of solution a very long time ago, because it became clear that neither the Indians nor the Pakistanis were willing to respect what the Kashmiris might actually want. And both of them have resisted any solution that doesn't give them what they want. And so the international community has basically thrown its hands up and walked away from the issue. What we need to focus on now is, A, to return to a ceasefire situation. So in 2003, India and Pakistan agreed a ceasefire along the line of control in Kashmir because of the level of violence and the threat of war. And so the first thing to do is to restore the ceasefire. Both sides need to step back, stop the shelling, and park their aeroplanes on the ground and stop the movement of tanks and troops that are now being reported along their international border. What we have to do is to make sure this doesn't escalate any further and no civilians continue to be harmed by the level of violence that we see on an increasing basis with each passing hour. And it's only in a situation where the fighting stops that we can begin to think about how do we take this forward.
Zia, I also wanted to go back to that issue of these two nuclear-armed countries both refusing to renounce first strike. What does that mean?
Well, India and Pakistan are just like all the other nuclear weapon states. They believe that what they do with their nuclear weapons and how they threaten each other and potentially the rest of the world is a matter only for them to decide. In that way, they're no different from the United States and Russia, Britain, France, China, Israel, or North Korea. They think that they are above international opinion, that they are above international law, and that they can threaten to use nuclear weapons with impunity. And we've seen just in the last few days that both the leaders of India and Pakistan have made veiled nuclear weapon threats. But this is no different from what Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump do. And this is just part of how nuclear weapon states parade themselves on the international stage. And it's only when the rest of the world decides that the real issue is the issue of states having nuclear weapons and threatening catastrophic mass violence that this has to stop.
Well, Professor, I wanted to ask you, in terms of this whole issue of Pakistan being a sponsor of Jaish-e-Mohammed, you've raised the issue in the past of all these proxy groups that Pakistan is supporting. Iran has claimed involvement by Pakistan in terrorism over there, and as well as Afghanistan. Can you talk about this proxy movement that Pakistan has continued to support, which has sown so much instability in the region?
Pakistan has a history going back to its founding in 1947 of using proxy fighters as a way to increase its capacity to wage war against its neighbors when it's felt that it has to do that. So it's used proxies in Kashmir against India. There are militant groups based in Pakistan that have attacked Iran. There was an attack just last week on a bus of Iranian Revolutionary Guard troops that killed about 20 Iranians. And the Iranians have said that Pakistanis were involved in that attack. And as we know, ever since 9/11, There have been militant groups based in Pakistan who come across the border into Afghanistan and carry out terrorism there. And so this is a long-established practice in Pakistan that it means that they can use force and not be held directly accountable because it's not their soldiers fighting in most cases. But this is par for the course. When you have armies in charge of countries, which is what is the case in Pakistan for most of its history, then they look for ways in which they can use military thinking, military strategy to carry out foreign policy rather than diplomacy. And what we have in Pakistan is a militarized state that uses violence as a normal tool of statecraft.
Zia Min, we're going to break and then ask you about what's happening in Iran and also the North Korea summit. Zia Min is a physicist, nuclear expert, disarmament activist, a professor at Princeton University. Stay with us.
Take my freedom, let my freedom, let my freedom take my freedom, forgive me.
Wealth by Talk Talk. Talk Talk's Mark Hollis passed away Monday at the age of 64. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to Iran, where President Hassan Rouhani has reportedly refused to accept the resignation of his foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, who quit suddenly in a surprise move announced via Instagram. Monday, Zarif played a central role in the negotiations leading to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Last year, President Trump withdrew from the landmark deal despite international condemnation of the move and United Nations inspectors saying Iran was adhering to the deal. Zarif did not offer any reasons for his resignation, simply writing, quote, "I sincerely apologize for the inability to continue serving and for all the shortcomings during my service."
Foreign Minister Zarif met with Code Pink delegation in Tehran, Iran, just hours before he announced his resignation. We turn right now to Medea Benjamin, who is in Tehran, met with the foreign minister. And if you can talk about what he said, Medea, and why you're in Iran right now, what the foreign minister said to your delegation.
It was quite amazing to have a chance to speak for an hour and a half to the foreign minister and have him tell us really a series of histories of negotiations or deals that have been made with the United States over many years and how they have been violated and how this kind of violations has created a sentiment among many Iranians that you just can't trust the United States. Zarif put his reputation on the line in negotiating the Iran nuclear agreement, and he told us that in 2015, when it was signed, there was jubilation in Iran, and about 80% of the Iranian people were in favor of the agreement. Since then, with Trump pulling out and the economic conditions worsening because of the reimposition of sanctions, the Iranian people are asking, what did we get out of this deal? And the popularity has dropped to 51%. He told us he was under tremendous pressure from the conservatives in Iran to pull out of the deal. He wants to keep it going. And he also faulted the Europeans for not really coming to the aid of Iran in trying to save the businesses in Europe from being able to trade with Iran.
Medea, could you talk about your people, the people delegation there in Iran, and what you've been able to see of the situation in the country given the U.S. sanctions?
Well, first, let me say how difficult it was to get here. We have 28 members on the delegation, and we had to wait months and months. First hearing, we got the visas, we didn't get the visas, we got the visas. It's very difficult. But of course, what the Iranians say to us is that it's impossible for them to get to the United States. We met a woman last night who is a twin, and her twin sister is in the U.S., and she can't go visit her twin sister. So we are very grateful that we finally did get the visas. And we have had a series of incredible meetings. We met yesterday with the special advisor on foreign affairs to the head of the parliament here. We went to the parliament. We met with delegates, both women parliamentarians, as well as parliamentarians who represent different minority groups like Assyrians and Armenians. We also had a free-ranging, wonderful meeting with the Iranian students and professors at the University of Tehran.
And I wanted to bring in Princeton University Professor Zia Min on the significance of Zarif in the negotiations, what happened with President Trump pulling the U.S. out of the nuclear deal, and how that undercut the foreign minister, and what, if in fact he does follow through on the resignation, even though the Iranian president has not accepted it, what that could mean.
Well, the history of U.S.-Iranian nuclear diplomacy for the last 20 years has been one where most of the time the two leaderships and the key possible negotiators have been out of step. So when Zarif and Rouhani and others tried to negotiate in the early 2000s, the George Bush administration said, no, we don't want to talk to the Iranians. When Iran got a hardline president and President Obama wanted to negotiate, the Iranians wouldn't talk. And we had this brief window where you had President Obama and John Kerry on the U.S. side, and you had President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif on the Iranian side. And I think it's fair to say that if it had not been for that combination, we would not have got a nuclear deal between the United States, the international community, and Iran. But the fact is that with President Trump, the agenda has gone back to hostility towards Iran, and the American goal is now regime change. What they don't want to see is Iran become fully integrated into the international community, which is what Foreign Minister Zarif and President Rouhani have been trying to do for a long time now. And by breaking out of the nuclear deal, by trying to make sure that the deal collapses completely, by putting more sanctions on Iran, by trying to force Iran to violate the deal, the U.S. hope is to create the conditions for regime change, and what this is doing is undermining and potentially destroying the possibility of democratic reform in Iran. And that only then allows the United States to say, we told you so, these people are incapable of reform and change, therefore we have to use whatever means are necessary to create regime change. This is all part of a long-standing right-wing agenda in the U.S. led by people like Bolton and Pompeo and others to try and force regime change in Iran. And unfortunately, the moderates and reformists in Iran, like Zarif, have had to pay the price for this.
We want to thank you both for being with us. And Professor Zia Min, we want to ask you to stay with us because we're going to end the show on what's happening in North Korea, the latest developments on the summit. But first now we're going to turn to R. Kelly, the famed R&B singer who was released from jail in Chicago Monday, 3 days after he was arrested and charged with 10 counts of aggravated criminal sexual assault. The charges involve 4 women and girls, 3 of whom are under the age of 17 at the time of the alleged crime. A judge set bail at $1 million, forced the singer to surrender his passport. Kelly eventually posted bond after spending the weekend in jail, pleaded not guilty Monday. Almost immediately after his release from jail, R. Kelly was spotted at a McDonald's in downtown Chicago, a spot his accusers say he used to frequent to prey on young girls.
Kelly's bond was posted by Valencia Love, an African-American Chicago area businesswoman who identified herself as a friend of Kelly's. Lawyer Michael Avenatti, who says he is representing an R. Kelly whistleblower, says he gave prosecutors a tape showing the singer engaging in sexual acts with a 14-year-old girl.
R. Kelly has been accused of abuse, predatory behavior and pedophilia throughout his career, but has avoided criminal conviction despite damning evidence and multiple witnesses. Last month, the explosive documentary series, Surviving R. Kelly, thrust the case back into the spotlight. Activists have been calling for justice for the black girls and women preyed on by R. Kelly and for the music industry to disassociate itself from the musician with the Mute R. Kelly campaign. Well, for more, we're joined by Dream Hampton, executive producer of the 6-part Lifetime documentary series Surviving R. Kelly. Also an executive producer of the HBO documentary It's a Hard Truth, Ain't It?, and the upcoming BET 6-part documentary series Finding Justice. Dream Hampton, it's wonderful to have you with us. First, respond to this latest news of the indictment of R. Kelly on 10 charges and his answer to that indictment saying he's not guilty.
You know, Amy, we had to run his not guilty claim about 30 times during our 6-hour docuseries. More offensive has been his attorney. I don't know what Yellow Pages, I don't know what billboard he got this low-rent attorney from, Steve Greenberg, who continues to use the most misogynist. I mean, he's from the 80s. It's surprising to me. Well, not surprising. I mean, R. Kelly squandered almost a $200 million fortune settling lawsuits over the past 25 years, creating an ecosystem where he is moving up to 5 and 6 girls across state lines constantly, having to feed them when he does allow them to eat. So I'm not surprised that, A, he wasn't able to post bail. I'm not surprised that he has the kind of attorney that he does right now. I'm just worried about the 2 girls that remain with him that he had sitting behind him in court the other day when he was unable to post bond. And I'm talking about Azriel Clary and Joycelyn Savage's, both of whom's family we featured in the Surviving R. Kelly documentary. And he brought them to court to say to us in the world that not only is he remorseful, but that he's going to show off, like he's going to flaunt in this moment when he's facing 10 new counts. He's going to bring 2 girls that are 30 years younger than him, one of whom he began sleeping with, raping, statutory rape, when she was 17, which is illegal in the state of Florida, which may result still in a Fed case. He brought those 2 girls behind him and had them sit behind him in court. The hubris is amazing, and I don't know who to blame. On one hand, I blame us, and by us I mean Black people. We have stood by this man. We have told him again and again that what he's doing isn't wrong, that we believe him despite, all evidence to the contrary, and it's emboldened him. He's used this kind of love that he has in the Black community as a currency. And I hope that this ends soon. I mean, when I interviewed the girls, each and every one of them talked about not wanting to see him in jail, actually, but wanting him to get help. They actually, even though they didn't use the words restorative justice, they have a restorative justice framework for this man. They want him, when they said they want him to get help, I took that to mean that they wanted him to get a combination of professional therapy and spiritual kind of help. Probably.
Well, what about this issue, Dream Hampton, of what should happen to him if he is convicted of these crimes? You heard the clip from Michael Avenatti. Is jail what a long stretch in jail what you think should happen with him?
I'm not a carceral feminist, so my instinct isn't to say, let's send people to the prison industrial complex. And I was just saying that at the end of each interview, where these girls had talked about all their pain and trauma, each of them said they wanted him to get help. None of them said they wanted him to go to jail. But a restorative justice process requires that someone admit the harm that they've done, that they own that harm, that they come to this process. I just did a film inside of an Indiana prison, and all of these men are owning their harm. They're entering a restorative justice process. They're saying, I take responsibility for what I did. I may have a systemic analysis, but I also take responsibility for what I did. R. Kelly's not doing that. So maybe jail is the only place for him.
And Dream Hampton, what do you make of him immediately going to McDonald's after he was freed? I mean, some may say, what on earth are you talking about? What difference does that make? But talk about this as a site of this as a place where he preyed on girls, where he looked for, chose, told people to get them.
Yeah, we had a couple of students who had gone, who are alumni of Kenwood Academy, in the film, and then people who corroborated these kinds of stories off camera, who talked about McDonald's, as you say, being one of the sites of his predation. He would cruise McDonald's near high schools and have the same kind of men that were around him when we saw the footage of him in McDonald's going up to young girls and giving them his number. And that's one of the ways that he would meet underage girls. It's amazing that, again, in this moment, he's flaunting again and again his predation. He has absolutely no remorse for what he's done. And maybe he has no understanding of what he's done.
What about the music industry here? Their role in this, all these years, these allegations, and none of the commercial music industry folks seem to be bothered.
Well, I'm less interested in the individual, say, players in the music industry than I am, say, Jive Records and Sony, who finally, dropped him. This should have happened in 2002 when a tape of clear abuse circulated, went viral on the streets, so to say. It should have ended then. And Black women and lots of well-meaning men have asked for that for almost 2 decades. So I think of people like Barry Weiss, who was the president of Jive Records, who wouldn't come on camera. I think about individual handlers that he had at his record label who also wouldn't come on camera. I think about Spotify, who for a moment said they would do this, really take this small step of removing him off of their promoted playlist, and then walk that back a couple of months later when some men in the company got upset. So, yeah, and I also think about award shows. I think about, I have a docuseries coming out on BET. But BET is a network that again and again gave him space on their award shows to do these epic performances after we all knew that he was guilty. Even though he was found not guilty in court, we knew he wasn't innocent. We saw the tape. It's been an open secret, his predation, for almost 2 decades.
We know you have to go in a minute, but this is one of the examples, Surviving R. Kelly, your dramatic, explosive 6-part Lifetime documentary series. Most incredible examples of journalism having an enormous effect as soon as it went down. You had people coming forward. You had in Chicago, prosecutors asking for information from people saying, don't be afraid to come forward. And you have your elevation of the voices, especially of Black women organizations like Mute R. Kelly. And can you talk about the impact of the activism to bring R. Kelly to justice?
Yeah, well, Amy, I mean, I'm sure that back when the elections were happening in Chicago, the campaign to get rid of Anita Alvarez by Anita, who wouldn't prosecute police who were guilty of terror in the community. You know, you had groups like BYP 100 and Assata's Daughter who wouldn't explicitly endorse Kim Foxx because they're not in that business, but they got rid of Anita Alvarez. That paved the way. So that's grassroots activism that gives us a Kim Foxx who, as you said, made this open call in Chicago, a city where I talked to more women off camera who wouldn't come on camera because they knew they'd be doxxed, disbelieved, and dragged on social media. But they would corroborate the details that I needed during my vetting process. So I talked to way more women in Chicago who wouldn't come on camera than did. So when Kim Foxx made that open call asking for other people, I really thought about the work that had happened before I even began filming. Again, of grassroots activists like BYP 100, BLM, Asada's Daughters. And then, yes, you're right. I mean, I partnered with A Long Walk Home. That's Salamisha Tillett and her sister Scheherazade Tillett's organization. They work with young teenage girls and youth, really, girls and people along the gender spectrum, quite frankly, who teenagers who are survivors of sexual violence in Chicago, many of whom have their own personal stories with R. Kelly. I partnered with them early on to be present for the survivors who were unpacking all of this trauma for our cameras. And of course, I wanted to feature the work of Mute R. Kelly. I went home to my hometown, Detroit, and one of the first scenes I shot was a protest in front of Little Caesars Arena. I hope you hear the disdain in my tone when I talk about that. But when I say that name, but yeah, in front of this arena, I shot these protesters who were a part of a chapter of Mute R. Kelly. And so I'm so grateful for the work that laid the foundation for us to do what we had to do. And yes, of course, finally, I'm grateful for every survivor who came forward because they knew that they weren't getting paid. We don't pay them. We treated this like a documentary project. We knew that we might get sued, so they couldn't be paid to come on camera. And they did it anyway, and they knew that they would be disbelieved. So I'm really grateful to the survivors.
Well, Dream Hampton, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Executive producer of the 6-part Lifetime documentary series, Surviving R. Kelly. Also an executive producer of the HBO documentary, It's a Hard Truth, Ain't It? And the upcoming BET 6-part documentary series, Finding Justice. You can go to democracynow.org to our 2 segments on Surviving R. Kelly when the series first came out, as we talk to survivors and activists from Mute R. Kelly. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to talk about the North Korea summit that's taking place in Vietnam right now. Stay with us.
What's love got to do? Got to do with it. What's love but a second-hand emotion? What's love got to do? Got to do with it. Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? It may seem to you that I'm acting confused when you're close to me. If I tend to look dazed, I read it someplace. I've got cause to be. There's a name for it. There's a phrase that fits. But whatever the reason, you do it for me. Oh, what's love got to do? Got to do with it. What's love but a second-hand emotion?
What's Love Got to Do with It by Tina Turner. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, President Trump is meeting today in Vietnam with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This is their second summit to discuss denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Trump and Kim met briefly in front of reporters before heading to an official dinner.
I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first. And we made a lot of progress, and I think the biggest progress was our relationship is really a good one. I think that your country has tremendous economic potential, unbelievable, unlimited. And I think that you will have a tremendous future with your country, a great leader. And I look forward to watching it happen and helping it to happen.
CNN is reporting that the White House initially tried to ban reporters from attending the official dinner that took place right after that meeting where you just watched Trump speaking. This was after a journalist shouted a question to Trump about Michael Cohen's upcoming testimony. After reporters collectively protested the ban, the White House conceded one print reporter could be present alongside cameras documenting the event. We go back now to Zia Mien, the Pakistani-born physicist, nuclear expert, disarmament activist, co-director of the Program on Science and Global Security at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. Professor Mien is the co-author of Unmaking the Bomb, a Fissile Material Approach to Nuclear Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. Zia, thanks for staying with us. Talk about the significance of this summit.
The second summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is enormously important in the sense that it keeps the path moving towards finding some kind of settlement of the nuclear crisis that has plagued the Korean Peninsula for such a long time. But I think the larger issue that we need to focus on is the fact that nuclear weapons are too important to be left to the whims of leaders like Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, or, as we talked about before, the leaders of India and Pakistan. You know, when the lives of millions of people have been put at risk by countries making nuclear weapons, then it shouldn't be left to random decisions by whimsical leaders as to who they want to talk to and when and where and about what. We need to have a much more organized international process to deal with the threat that nuclear weapons pose to humanity and not wait for, whenever Donald Trump feels like talking to Vladimir Putin or whenever Kim Jong-un feels that he can now talk to the United States, or when the Prime Minister of India thinks that he can threaten Pakistan or Pakistan thinks that they need diplomacy with India. When such great stakes are involved, we need the international community and international institutions to act together in an organized and systematic way and not leave it to the whims of individuals who think that somehow they can save the day when it suits them and in the way that it suits them. That's a much more important issue to focus on than what may or may not happen in one particular summit in some hotel in Hanoi.
Well, in what way, though, could progress be made? There is the issue that still remains of that there's never been an actual peace treaty between the United States and North Korea, and the addressing also the issue of the thousands of U.S. troops that still remain in South Korea. Would that be being able to achieve at least a peace treaty, begin the process of then addressing the nuclear weapons issue?
Well, it might and it might not. You have to remember that the North Koreans want a peace treaty, and a peace treaty would be a good thing. The Korean War's been over for a very long time. But the lack of a treaty or the presence of a peace treaty, it did not stop the United States and the Soviet Union threatening each other with thousands of nuclear weapons, even though they never went to war. And there was no question of, peace treaties or anything like that. And similarly, in the case of Pakistan and India, it's not the absence of a peace treaty that stops them from talking about nuclear weapons or enabling them to talk about nuclear weapons. And so I think what you have to do is ask the question, are we going to focus on the issue at hand, which is how do we deal with the 9 states with nuclear weapons in the world? Or do we get into this endless process of trading diplomacy for sanctions and this and that, depending on whoever happens to be in charge at any particular time? Because what we've seen in the last 70 years is we still have thousands of nuclear weapons in the world, despite so many efforts at this kind of diplomacy. So we need a much more determined and different approach to deal with the threat of nuclear weapons, rather than continue to rely on this idea that, leaders and summits are going to find a way out of this situation.
Do you think this should be a model, this North Korean summit, Zia, for a meeting with Iran? Can you explain President Trump's approach to Iran, pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, approach to Russia, pulling out of the INF, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces deal, and having this nuclear summit? Well,
the issue is not right now, as I'm trying to say. pulling out of the Iran deal or having a summit with the North Koreans. Having the nuclear deal with Iran back in place would be a good thing. Having North Korea continue to commit to a diplomatic process going forward would be a good thing. We only have to think back to when North Korea and the United States were threatening each other on a daily basis. But neither of these are going to solve the underlying problem, which is that where is the rest of the world in dealing with this question of nuclear weapons? There are 9 countries with nuclear weapons. None of them have actually made any serious effort to give up their nuclear weapons. They talk about talking rather than giving up their nuclear weapons. And I think what we need to do is to have many more countries in the world say, look, we have a stake in this because the future of humanity is at stake when it comes to talking about nuclear weapons. And we are going to lay down some rules and conditions about how nuclear weapon states should behave. And until we get to that point and begin to discipline the 9 states with nuclear weapons and bring them back under international law, we're not really going to address the real problem, the elephant in the room, which is the existence of nuclear weapons. You can't manage something like this with this kind of diplomatic symmetry that has gone on for such a long time.
But how would it be possible to discipline these 9 nations, given the enormous, the disproportionate influence that they have in international bodies, whether it's the United Nations or others, in terms of addressing the issue of continued proliferation?
This is exactly the question that we all need to be asking ourselves. What does it take to actually control and discipline and restrain the United States, Russia, Britain, France, China, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea? I mean, there are 9 countries. Between them, there are 14,500 nuclear weapons. But there are 193 countries in the world, not 9. 193. And the question is, how do we get all the rest of them and the people in these 9 countries that have nuclear weapons to take interest, to get engaged, and to demand that we do something about nuclear weapons and work for their elimination as an urgent priority? And I think the question you've asked is absolutely the right one. What does it take to control the great powers that have basically dominated world affairs for such a long time through their threat of catastrophic violence? And this is something that until we ask the question in exactly the way that you asked, we're not going to be able to find an answer.
You're talking about the 9 nuclear powers. What about what's happening with Saudi Arabia? Last week, House Democrats accusing the Trump administration of moving toward transferring highly sensitive nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia in potential violation of U.S. law.
Well, this is part of the geopolitics of the Middle East and how the U.S. is trying to build allies in its campaign against Iran. But also, this is not the first time the United States has sold nuclear technology to its friends and tried to deny it to those it sees as hostile. The United States does this with India, but denies nuclear technology to Pakistan. So people have traded nuclear technology as ways of making allies, strengthening their friends, and have tried to prevent the spread of nuclear technology to those that it sees as potentially hostile. So there's nothing new in this. This has been going on for more than 50 years, despite the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The idea that that was the way in which we were going to manage the threat of nuclear technology and the geopolitics of seeking influence and exercising power in the world, we can see that that hasn't worked the way that people thought it was supposed to. We have to deal with a much more fundamental question, and that question is one of world order and the role of international law and of the international community. And as one pointed out, we have to deal with the fact that some countries have a huge amount of power in the world, and it's only through collective action when the rest of the world and the people in the 9 nuclear-armed states say, look, enough of this. We are not going to be held hostage. We want you to sign the new nuclear weapons ban treaty from 2017. I mean, more than 70 countries have already signed it. 122 countries have supported it. It bans nuclear weapons. It says the threat of use of nuclear weapons is illegal now under international law. And that's the kind of initiative that we need to see more and more countries take. And we need to see it be part of the domestic debate in the United States and in the other countries with nuclear weapons. Because until we focus with great clarity on this question, that the challenge we face is the existence of nuclear weapons, and the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons and threaten to use them as part of their military and political policy, we're not going to get away from the fact we're going to keep coming back to crisis.
We thank you for being with us. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining us.